America and Iraq's war was not just a conflict between two countries. It was a war that reduced a nation to rubble, while casting a shadow of doubt over the credibility of a powerful state. In this war, Iraq lost its cities, its generations, and its peace. America did not only lose soldiers, it lost trust, it lost moral authority, and its claim to global leadership weakened. But the story does not end there. The fire of this war spread from the Middle East and affected the entire world. Terrorism increased, instability spread, and global politics changed forever. This video will not only show how the war began, but also how a single decision changed the fate of the entire world. If you want to understand why one war shook the world, you need to watch this video until the very end. This war did not start in a single moment. It was not the result of a single speech, accusation, or attack. The Iraq War was actually the culmination of years of fear, suspicion, political interests, and miscalculations of power. The world was told that the war was necessary for security, that if action was not taken today, it would be too late tomorrow. But behind the scenes, questions remained, questions that were never clearly answered. In this video, we will not only see how the war began, but also understand how this decision transformed not just Iraq and America, but the entire world. The Iraq War's origins cannot be understood without its historical context. It was not merely the outcome of immediate political tension. It was the continuation of the conflicts that followed the Gulf War of 1990-1991. In 1991, Iraq was defeated by a coalition of American and Allied forces, yet Saddam Hussein remained in power. Following the war, the United Nations imposed strict sanctions on Iraq. Oil sales were limited, economic activities were tightly controlled, and weapons inspections were strictly enforced. These sanctions hit ordinary citizens the hardest. Food, medicine, and basic necessities became scarce. Thousands of people died from disease and malnutrition, yet the U.S. and its allies claimed it was necessary to prevent Iraq from rebuilding weapons and to safeguard global security. The September 11th attacks in 2001 changed America's perspective. A wave of fear and insecurity swept across the country, and American leadership decided that if Iraq possessed weapons or had the potential to produce them, they must be eliminated preemptively. Iraq's political and military situation. Saddam Hussein's government was strong, but internally it relied on fear and strict control. The Iraqi military was technically outdated, yet it remained unified under central command. Iraqi civilians lived under constant pressure. Streets, markets, and schools carried on daily life. But basic services were scarce due to sanctions and government policies. UN inspectors repeatedly visited Iraq, but Saddam restricted access to sensitive sites. This eroded global trust and made it easier for the U.S. and its allies to portray Iraq as a dangerous country. Domestic situation in the U.S. After 9/11, fear and security concerns dominated American society. The government adopted a new foreign policy, the Bush Doctrine, which emphasized preemptive strikes, attacking potential threats before they could act. Public support for military action was extremely high. President George W. Bush's approval rating reached 90%, and the U.S. Congress authorized military force against Iraq unanimously. Economically, the U.S. was strong, but military campaigns were expensive. The Iraq invasion boosted the defense industry, yet over time it added to national debt and financial strain. War fronts and key locations. The Iraq invasion began in March 2003, with attacks launched from northern, southern, and central fronts. Southern Iraq. Coalition forces carried out air and ground operations toward Baghdad. The siege of Baghdad lasted several weeks. Northern Iraq. Coalition forces established control in Kurdish areas. Though relatively safe, infrastructure was damaged during military operations. Western and central Iraq. Basic civilian infrastructure and industrial areas suffered severe damage. Civilians were heavily affected and casualties mounted. By the end of March, Baghdad fell, and Saddam Hussein's regime collapsed. Human and economic impact on Iraq. The war devastated civilian life. Thousands were killed. Millions displaced. Infrastructure was destroyed. Electricity and water supply became limited. Schools and hospitals were closed. Food and medical shortages intensified. The economy was severely affected. Oil production and export disrupted. Industrial sector nearly halted. GDP remained negative for several years. Reconstruction efforts were necessary in Baghdad and major cities, but insecurity limited investment. Impact on the U.S. While the U.S. led the invasion, the consequences were far-reaching. Military. Thousands of U.S. troops were deployed. Some were killed, some injured, and long-term demand increased. Political. America's global credibility was challenged. Some allies opposed the invasion, and international institutions questioned U.S. actions. Economic. The invasion was costly. Debt and defense budgets rose. Although the defense industry benefited, domestic politics, fear and security concerns dominated public opinion. But long-term instability in Iraq fueled political criticism. End of war and aftermath. Saddam Hussein's government fell, but Iraq descended into instability. Military institutions collapsed. Legal and judicial systems disintegrated. Sectarian violence erupted. Cities and essential infrastructure were destroyed. The weapons that justified the war were never found. This raised global questions. Was the war really necessary? Terrorism and instability spread throughout Iraq, affecting the entire Middle East. Global impact. The Iraq War reshaped the world's political landscape. U.S. influence in the Gulf increased. Oil markets experienced volatility. International law and the UN's role were questioned. Terrorism and instability rose globally. This war was not merely a conflict between two countries. It affected global economy, politics, and human lives. The Iraq War taught an unforgettable lesson. It was not merely a fight between two nations, but a result of fear, power, and misinformation. Thousands of lives were lost, millions displaced, and human well-being devastated. Global politics, economy, and security were permanently affected. The weapons that justified the war were never found. This war reminds us that when fear and self-interest overpower truth, the consequences are catastrophic and endure for generations.